The sun was setting over the empty highway when trucker Jake spotted something on the side of the road: an abandoned dog, weak and starving. He almost drove past, but something in the dog's eyes stopped him. Against his better judgment, he pulled over. What he didn't know was that saving this dog would change his life forever, and that one day the dog would return the favor. Sometimes the ones we save end up saving us. Have you ever had an animal change your life? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Jake had seen plenty of strays on the road before. Most were too scared or too wild to approach, but this one was different. The dog stood frozen by the roadside, ribs visible through its dusty fur, its ears pinned back in both fear and hope. It didn't run when he stopped his truck. It just stood there, watching him. Jake sighed, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "This ain't my problem," he muttered. He had deliveries to make, deadlines to meet, but something about the dog made him hesitate. He grabbed a half-eaten sandwich from the passenger seat, stepped out, and crouched a few feet away. The dog eyed him warily, sniffing the air but not moving closer. "All right, buddy, you hungry?" Jake tore off a piece of bread and tossed it. The dog flinched but didn't run. It sniffed, then cautiously took a step forward, swallowed the bite, then looked at him again, waiting. Jake shook his head. "Damn it," he muttered. He broke off more, tossing it a little closer. Slowly, the dog edged forward, inch by inch, never taking its eyes off him. It didn't just look hungry, it looked desperate. Minutes passed. The sun dipped lower. The road was empty, stretching into the vast desert, the only sound the wind rustling through dry grass. Then, just as the dog was within arm's reach, a distant rumble broke the silence. A pair of headlights appeared down the highway, moving fast. Jake frowned. He wasn't expecting company. A black SUV roared past him, slowed, then made a U-turn before pulling up beside his truck. The windows were tinted, the engine idling low and mean. Jake felt it before it happened. Trouble. The dog let out a low growl, stepping back, hackles raised. The SUV's passenger window rolled down. A man in sunglasses and a leather jacket leaned out, grinning. "Evening, driver," he said smoothly. "You lost?" Jake remained still. "Nope." The man chuckled. "See, my boys and I, we're in a bit of a situation. Need a ride, and I figure a nice rig like yours would do just fine." Jake didn't move, didn't even blink. He knew this game. If you showed fear, they'd eat you alive. The man nodded toward the dog. "You got yourself a pet now? Cute." His grin widened. "Shame, though. Looks like it wouldn't last long out here." Jake's jaw clenched. He recognized the threat beneath the words. The man gestured to the others in the SUV. 2 more doors opened. 2 more men stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts where Jake had no doubt they were packing weapons. The dog, sensing the shift in the air, let out another low, warning growl. Jake glanced down at it, then back at the men. "That's so?" he muttered, his voice like gravel. The wind howled through the desert. The night was coming fast, and trouble had just arrived. The man in the leather jacket stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. He was still smiling, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Let's not make this hard, old man," he said, tapping a cigarette against his palm. "Hand over the keys, and maybe we don't leave you bleeding on the side of the road." Jake didn't move. He'd seen this before, punks who thought a trucker alone on an empty highway was an easy target. They always underestimated the man behind the wheel. The dog growled again, stepping in front of Jake, its teeth bared. The gang chuckled. "Ain't that cute?" one of the men sneered. "Dog thinks it's a guard dog." Jake slowly exhaled through his nose. He could feel it now, the tension rising, thick as the dust swirling in the dying sunlight. The leader's smile faded. He reached inside his jacket, flashing the grip of a pistol. "I don't like repeating myself," he said, voice low, controlled. "Keys, now." Jake glanced at the weapon, then at the other 2 men, who had started circling him like wolves closing in for the kill. The SUV's engine rumbled behind them, ready to roll out as soon as they had what they wanted. One of them, stocky, with a scar down his cheek, took another step forward, reaching for Jake's jacket. "Come on, old man, don't—" The dog lunged. A flash of teeth. A snarl. The stocky man screamed as the dog sank its jaws into his arm. He stumbled back, cursing, trying to shake it off. The leader's expression twisted into fury. "Get that damn mud off him!" One of the other men moved to kick the dog, but Jake was faster. He stepped in, throwing a punch so hard it cracked against the man's jaw like a hammer on steel. The guy went down hard, groaning. The leader pulled his gun. Jake grabbed the nearest thing he could, his tire iron from the truck step. For a split second, no one moved. The gang was stunned. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The dog let go of the man's arm, blood dripping from its teeth. It took a stance beside Jake, growling deep in its throat. The leader's gun was still up, but now his hand wasn't as steady. Jake's grip tightened on the tire iron. The fight had just begun. Jake had spent years on the road, keeping his head down, avoiding unnecessary fights. But tonight was different. These men weren't just looking for a score, they wanted to make an example out of him. And worse, they had underestimated him. The leader's gun was still up, his finger tense on the trigger. His wounded man was groaning on the ground, clutching his bleeding arm. The other thug, still dazed from Jake's punch, struggled to stand. Jake locked eyes with the leader, his voice steady. "You boys really don't know what kind of mistake you just made." The leader sneered, trying to regain control. "You think you're some kind of tough guy, old man? That mud ain't gonna save you." Jake smirked. He already did. In one smooth motion, Jake swung the tire iron. The leader barely had time to react before the steel rod smashed into his wrist. The gun clattered to the ground, and he howled in pain, cradling his arm. Before the other thug could react, the dog lunged again, knocking him to the dirt with a savage growl. The tables had turned. The leader, now scrambling backward, eyes wild with shock, looked up at Jake. You don't fight like some trucker." Jake crouched down, gripping the man's collar, his voice a low growl. "That's 'cause I ain't just a trucker." For the first time that night, the gang realized they weren't dealing with an easy target. Jake stood, lifting the gun from the dirt, ejecting the magazine with a calm flick of his wrist. The dog stood beside him, ears perked, waiting. Now it was their turn to be afraid. The leader of the gang lay on the dirt, cradling his broken wrist, his face contorted in pain. His confidence had drained away, replaced by something Jake had seen in the eyes of many men before: fear. The remaining thug, still standing, took an uncertain step back, his bravado crumbling like dust in the wind. Jake took his time. He bent down and picked up the leader's discarded gun, ejecting the magazine with a practiced flick of his wrist. The empty weapon clattered to the ground. The message was clear: these men never had the power they thought they did. The dog, still baring its teeth, stood guard next to Jake, watching every move the gang made. The mud had been tossed away, left to fend for itself, but tonight it had proven more loyal than any man Jake had ever known. You don't know who you're messing with," the leader stammered, trying to salvage a shred of authority. Jake chuckled, adjusting his jacket. "No, kid, you don't." He crouched down, gripping the man's collar and pulling him in close. "You walk into truck stops, shake people down, rob them blind. You think that makes you powerful?" He scoffed, shaking his head. "Real power ain't in a gun or in fear, it's in respect. And right now, you got none." The truck stop's diner door creaked open, and Jake noticed the other truckers stepping out, their faces set with hard stares. They had seen everything. Lou, the grizzled owner of the diner, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You punks have been running your mouths for too long." One by one, the regulars gathered. These weren't just men in worn denim and steel-toed boots. They were veterans of the road, men who had seen and done things these wannabe outlaws couldn't begin to understand. The remaining thug turned to his leader, panic in his eyes. "We gotta get out of here, man." The leader swallowed hard, looking at the growing crowd. He had lost. Not just the fight, not just his pride, but his reputation. Jake stood up, taking a step back. "I could have ended this a lot worse for you." He nodded toward the road. "Now take your friend and walk." The leader scrambled to his feet, yanking his wounded man up with him. "This ain't over," he spat, but his voice wavered. Jake smiled, slow and knowing. "For you, it is." The gang turned and limped toward the darkness, their pride shattered. They wouldn't be showing their faces around this place again. As they disappeared into the night, Lou clapped a hand on Jake's shoulder. "That was something, son." Jake looked down at the dog, who wagged its tail, its eyes filled with something rare trust. "I didn't do it alone," Jake said, scratching the dog's head. The truckers laughed, and just like that, the road had a new legend. The dust had settled, the gang was gone, and the truck stop had returned to its usual quiet hum. Jake took a deep breath, running a hand over his bruised knuckles. The dog, now sitting at his feet, let out a slow exhale, as if it too knew the fight was over. Lou, the diner owner, stepped forward, shaking his head with a chuckle. "You know, I've seen a lot of things in my time, but a stray dog saving a trucker from a gang? That's a first." Jake looked down at the dog, who gazed back up at him with unwavering loyalty. "Guess we're even now," he said, reaching down to scratch behind the mutt's ears. The other truckers murmured amongst themselves, shaking their heads in admiration. They knew Jake had done something more than just fight off a few thugs. She had restored order, put bullies in their place, and earned the respect of everyone watching. One of the younger truckers, still wide-eyed from the scene, finally spoke. "Mister, how'd you stay so calm? Weren't you scared?" Jake smirked. "Son, fear ain't the enemy. It's what you do with it that matters." He glanced at the dog again. That mutt could have run away, but he didn't. Stood his ground just like I did. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to change everything. Lou crossed his arms. "So what now? You keeping the dog?" Jake looked down at the scrappy animal. It wasn't the prettiest thing, scars on its muzzle, a rough coat, one ear flopped down. But it had heart. And in a world where men came and went, where trust was rare, Jake knew this dog had proven itself more than any man ever could. "Yeah," Jake said, nodding. "I think he's found his home." The other truckers smiled, a few giving approving nods. One of the older drivers clapped Jake on the back. "Ain't that something? A stray dog walks into your life, and before you know it, he's got your back like family." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, funny how that works." The truck stop lights buzzed in the quiet night, the stars shining overhead. As Jake made his way back to his rig, the dog padded alongside him, never straying more than a step away. He opened the door and gave the dog a look. "Well, you coming or what?" The mutt wagged its tail, hesitated for only a second, then jumped into the cab like it had always belonged there. Jake slid into the driver's seat, adjusting his hat before starting the engine. As the truck rumbled to life, he glanced down at his new co-pilot, now curled up on the passenger seat. "Guess it's just you and me now, partner." The highway stretched out before them, endless and unknown. But Jake wasn't worried. He'd spent his whole life on the road, and now he had a reminder that sometimes the best company comes when you least expect it. Now, let me ask you, have you ever had a moment where you realized someone, or something, had your back when you least expected it? Share your story in the comment. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real stories from the road.